Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Soundcheck, the rock and roll and alternative music podcast here at Central Michigan Life. I am one of your wonderful co-hosts, Andrew Mullen, and I'm joined by the even more wonderful
Michael Livingston. Thank you, Andrew.
Of course, Michael, you are indeed wonderful. We're also joined by the ever wonderful podcast editor,
Ben Ackley.
Yes, Ben Ackley. I think you might be taking a bit of a backseat on this one because we have a guest in today. A guest that gives me and Michael, probably Ben too, I'm going to assume, a lot of headaches when we work at Central Michigan Life, but he supposedly helps us anyway. So very happy to have on our guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Dave Clark. I'm the advisor of CM Life and a Van Halen super fan, which is why I'm with you today.
Yes.
And the patron saint of dad rock.
Is that me or is that Edward?
That's you.
Oh, that's me. Okay.
Oh, lovely. So, yes. But before we kind of get into that, though, I should kind of point out that first of all, we've had a bit of a change in the scheduled programming. We were supposed to do a episode, we're supposed to record an episode for this week about kind of picking randomly through each of our vinyl collections and kind of talking about records and what we picked out. Fortunately, though, due to unfortunate circumstances, that had to be pushed back. And you might also be getting this episode a little bit later than usual, but again, that's mainly because scheduling conflicts. But as Dave pointed out, yes, we're here not for the happiest of reasons. I'm sure anyone listening by now has heard, the news has been out for about a week now. Guitar legend and icon, Eddie Van Halen passed away at the age of 65 due to cancer. Last week, and it sucks. It's sad. We can insert 2020 is the worst fucking thing ever here, but yeah, it's a really sad thing, and I never thought we would do this episode, honestly, and that's mainly because there's someone on the podcast, and I'm sure he'll introduce himself in a second, who's not really a big fan of Van Halen, which is fine. I'm not like sitting there to judge or anything, but because of that, I never thought to do a Van Halen episode, because I'm not sure how we would have done it. But now that with Eddie's passing, we thought it would be probably the best time to kind of share, our thoughts on the band and more or less kind of celebrate his legacy, celebrate his talents and virtuosos as a guitarist.
Even me, who wasn't the biggest Van Halen fan going in, I understood and I knew the necessity that a Van Halen episode was needed, or at least an Eddie Van Halen episode, because in my mind and in many other people's mind, he's the most important person in the band. I mean, it's his last name, so of course.
Yeah, and just to be abundantly clear for people who know me, they know I'm a huge Van Halen fan. I have been for a long time. So I would just like to point out that this episode was not my idea, and the Soundcheck guys are not being held hostage to do this against their will. They chose this topic, and I would say, Andrew, that this is a time to really celebrate this music, and certainly celebrate the genius of Edward Van Halen. And that's not a word that I throw around lightly at all. I mean, his impact on music since 1978 has been immeasurable. And when people talk about guitar heroes, and there's a lot of this discussion that's happened since Edward passed away, we think a guitar hero, there's just not that many. I mean, honestly, you can't put Edward up against like a Jeff Beck or a Joe Perry or even an Eric Clapton, who is Edward's hero. I mean, those are great guitar players that, second to none. Pete Townsend, another one of his influences. But Edward did much more than just play guitar. He sort of reinvented the style of rock guitar in 1978, and sort of left everybody in his wake for about the next 30 years. And in addition to that, he made an impact on guitar players, not just with his style and virtuosity, but also he was an inventor. Some of the things that he came up with, along with people like Floyd Rose and the Kramer Guitar Company, the Wolfgang guitar that we saw Jack White play on Saturday Night Live this past weekend. Those are all innovations that, even when we think of, guitar hero, Jimi Hendrix instantly comes to mind. Jimi Hendrix didn't design his own guitars. He didn't cobble them together piece by piece like Ed did. So really his influence is immeasurable. And
I found out he also invented tablature too, or had a hand in that, which is the way I learned guitar and the way so many other people learn guitar nowadays.
You could say that Edward's career really spawned a whole cottage industry with not just guitar players, but music stores and guitar makers and things like that. So it's a really good time to just appreciate the man and the impact that he made on music, and the fact that that's going to live on, not just the songs, but all the innovations that he's responsible for. So as much as I'd like to be sad, every time I listen to this music, it just ends up putting a smile on my face.
Which kind of leads me to a question I have for you, Dave. And I kind of want all of us to take turns answering this one. Kind of before we dive into the meat of this episode, obviously you've been, nicest way I'll put this, you've been alive a lot longer than me and Michael. You certainly had a lot more time to enjoy this music. You were young when this music came out, talking about especially the first 6 Van Halen records, which I know were your favorite stuff lies. What kind of drew you initially when you were so young to this music? Like what about this music means to you, especially talking in terms of Eddie's guitar playing?
So that'll be the first of many old jokes that Andrew makes this evening, so buckle up. So I really became aware of Van Halen, as you point out. I was a little boy, right? I was born in 71. Van Halen was formed in 72. So I remember, FM radio when I was a little boy was still pretty new. And I remember first hearing Van Halen on FM radio. So driving around in the parents' car, and I distinctly remember, You Really Got Me, and especially Dance the Night Away. I think that's one of the first songs, as a kid that I really responded to because of that chorus, that bright sounding, trademark Van Halen chorus style, which is a mixture of David Lee Roth, the singer, certainly a little bit of Edward and Alex Van Halen in there as well, but mostly led by the high tenor of Michael Anthony, patron saint of bass players everywhere and Jack Daniels aficionados. Those songs really stuck out to me. So it was the singles. And then as I got a little bit older, Pretty Woman, their cover of the Roy Orbison song, was a radio hit. So that was kind of inescapable in and around 1982. So that's kind of the first experience with Van Halen, is just like a lot of people, you just hear it on the radio. But I distinctly remember right around 6th grade, a very rainy afternoon, my friend Scott Flory had taken I think it was his cousins. It was their relatives. It was like an older relative who had a copy of Fair Warning, and he brought it to school. So indoor recess, it's raining outside. We go get the tape recorder in the classroom, and we put in Fair Warning at lunchtime. And the song that he was really taken with was an instrumental called Sunday Afternoon in the Park. And we listened to that, I think, over and over and over again. And it's Eddie Van Halen who is just beating on this Moog synthesizer and getting all these crazy sounds out of it. And then that leads into One Foot Out the Door. And I think we probably flipped it over. And I know he played Sinner Swing because I had a swear word in it. And that was very titillating in 6th grade. So I would say probably that day I became, an Edward Van Halen fan, that, you sort of hear this name, this mysterious sounding name, and you don't really know what the music sounds like. And that was the day that I kind of said, yeah, I like that Eddie Van Halen guy. I think I want to pay attention to him. And then, a year after that, I probably had all their records, and I was absolutely a fan. Probably right before Jump came out. So that was a song that when that premiered on FM radio, which is right before New Year's Eve. So that would have been like December 1983. When that song came out on the radio, I was looking forward to it. Oh, this Van Halen group's going to put something else out. And of course, that was decidedly different than anything I'd heard before. Their kind of first foray into pop radio. So, so Van Halen's been with me since I was about 12 years old, if not a little bit before that. So to say that the loss of Edward is, personally affecting is kind of an understatement. So they've always been real close to me. I can't think of any big event in my life, no vacation. We played Van Halen songs at my wedding reception. So they sort of always against my wife's wishes, I guess, a little bit. Not really. But yeah, they've been a part of my life for a long time.
Let's give that first song you mentioned there a listen. I had Sunday Afternoon in the Park in the playlist because it was one of my favorites too. So if Ben, you want to play some of that just to give a little taste of some music. It's funny that that's one of the first, Dave, considering that's not your typical Van Halen song. That's really synthy and almost like Black Sabbath level of like death.
Yeah, it's kind of like hard rock meets like, doom metal or something like that on keyboard. It's such a weird thing. But one of the things that's, so it's a different sound for Van Halen. It was a departure. Obviously, the rest of the record doesn't sound like that. But the one sort of through line, and we'll talk about this probably with a lot of these songs, is that it's Edward and Alex. When we talk about brown sound, which is the tone that Eddie's kind of famous for, it's that guitar tone, very thick sounding, sometimes with the phaser. Overdriven amp. Sometimes we think about it as just Edward's guitar, but I think, Alex's drums play a big part of that sound as well. I think some of these songs that we'll cover tonight, the interplay, the rhythm section of Van Halen was not Michael Anthony and Alex Van Halen. It was really Edward Van Halen's brilliant rhythm playing and his brother's brilliant drumming. And Mike Anthony was basically just singing backup, but God bless him.
Before we go any further, like Andrew said, do you want to talk about your first encounter with Van Halen, Andrew, and kind of what stands out for you?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm sure I'll go, but I also kind of want to hear a little bit about yours after before we start talking. I know you have probably the least to say in that front, but I still kind of want to know. We've talked about it a couple of times, but yeah, I'll go first. So I was first getting into music in 8th grade, like probably closer to the end of 8th grade. I can remember just starting to become really interested in music, listening to music. It's kind of my thing. And if you guys, by the way, this is not the first time Dave's been on the podcast. You can go back all the way to, I believe, season 2, listen to our 2-hour hair metal episode if you want to hear us three kind of bash and also kind of enjoy some of the music we talk about there. But if anyone who's listened to the episode might remember that I that's kind of where I started. It was hair metal, kind of not just hair metal, hard rock. Like that stuff that was loud, fast, and with a lot of energy. As you can imagine, Van Halen hit that nerve that I was at the time hard. I think that Van Halen was an early favorite of mine. The first time you hear Eruption, it's just something you don't forget. It's mind shattering when you hear like, oh, okay, this is like if a guitarist could be a god, this is what he would sound like. Like, and we did an episode. I don't remember what it was titled, but also I think it was also back in season 2 where we talked about our favorite performers in music, and I pretty sure I've said that Eddie Van Halen is my favorite guitarist, and that has not changed since then. And in fact, that's been for the case pretty much since I heard Eruption. Like there is nothing like, if I can, there are a lot of guitarists that I can just sit down and just watch like a YouTube video of them or something playing. I can think of B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan would be a couple names that comes to mind. No one more so than Eddie Van Halen. It's just mesmerizing. And then talking about the music, you add on just the great, drum work of Alex Van Halen and just the undeniable charisma of David Lee Roth, and kind of got ruined when Sammy Hagar came in there, but that's a whole nother podcast. Michael Anthony, he was there as well. But, just combined force of all these 4 guys just led to, I think, one of the greatest hard rock bands ever. And Eddie Van Halen's contribution to that cannot be denied. So it was his band. So
yeah. If I can piggyback off you then, Andrew, and mine will be really short because I don't have a lot of experience with Van Halen. I didn't have this eye-opening experience the first time I heard Eruption, like so many of my friends have. The first Van Halen song I heard was Little Guitars, and it's because my dad threw it on my MP3 player when I was in like 5th grade. And like Andrew and so many other guys and girls I know that are my age, a lot of the music we are introduced to is, of course, from our parents. And of course, I know Dave's probably passing Van Halen to his son, and so many other people are as well. But for me, my guitarist has and always probably will be Jay Mascis, and Van Halen wasn't there for me. In fact, I've probably even shit talked Van Halen on this podcast before. I never was impressed. And I gotta say, before we get into the meat of this episode, let me just take back everything I said, because goddamn, listeners, Dave did me a wonderful service and just kind of hand selected songs that he kind of guessed would be more catered to my taste, which is more on the experimental side, when Eddie is just kind of going crazy on the guitar and trying new things and innovating. And that is the side of Van Halen I think I can lean towards. And I find myself now listening to nothing but Van Halen all day today, all day yesterday, and probably all day tomorrow, because god damn, I missed a lot, man. And that's going to be basically my tone this whole episode is, where has this been all of my life? But yeah.
So that's come up before, because the CM lifers, when they walk into my office, they'll see the wall that's sort of that I face across from my desk is nothing but posters, and probably 90% of those posters are Van Halen posters. So from like concerts and things like that, like advertisements. So I definitely remember you looking at that one day and just like, why them? And that's a valid question, and especially because you don't like what we call hair metal, right? That 80s hard rock kind of vapid, and I think you can probably see the difference now. The lineage of Edward sort of creates this new sound, and then when
to call them a hair metal band, there's no way they're a hair metal band.
When the copycats sort of take their place on the Sunset Strip after Van Halen's gone and they're touring the world. You can see how that gets watered down, right? The lyrics get dumber and dumber and dumber with every incarnation. The guitar players don't really show you any originality. It's like, who can try to play Eddie's solo the second best, the third best, the fourth best, right? But now that you can kind of see where that music sprang from, it gives you a greater appreciation for what he did. And it also, I think, helps separate the pack, right? Because I think most people would throw Van Halen, particularly, I see Eddie's career in kind of three stages. We'll call it Van Halen 1 is the beginning, right? So from the start of the band until 1984. Van Halen 2 we'll call Van Hagar years, right? Van Halen 3, pretty much early retirement. Very inactive through most of the 2000s, except for a couple of tours. But for that first period of activity where most of his innovation happens, everybody's trying to sound like him. Everybody's trying to get that secret, style of playing and stuff. And probably, I mean, like I said, you can kind of see where those bands came from now, but you can see how Van Halen is really apart from them. They're the originators. And as far as hair metal, I would never consider them that. They're a 70s hard rock band. As a matter of fact, as the poet laureate himself would say, David Lee Roth, they're not hard rock, they're not heavy metal, they're big rock. So they created kind of their own term for that, big being bombastic. And that every song, I know Andrew's going to talk about Hot for Teacher a little bit later. Every song ends with what Dave would call the end of the world ending, right? It's that huge, drawn out, almost a 60-second ending to a song that just, makes you jump up out of your seat. And, probably the thing that gets most of the hair metal guys excited, the new sound that and the new playing style that Edward is pioneering is Eruption, the most famous guitar solo in probably the history of guitar solos.
We got to play that real quick, by the way, because you haven't heard it yet. Maybe you'll have the experience.
And what you hear is just some brilliant guitar playing, but underneath that, you can hear the classically trained pianist. Edward and Alex started out on piano before they did anything else. And you can see where he's referencing some Bach and maybe some Beethoven, but he's doing it in a way that basically sets a new standard for guitar players for the next 30 years. Tell you what, that picture on the front of the first Van Halen record, Edward holding up his guitar, looks like it's on fire a little bit, and he's just yelling, he's just screaming, he's announcing himself to the world, and that's exactly what that music does.
Yeah, I can see the classical music in it, like the way it kind of bends and the way he's tapping up and down the scales. It is kind of like a Beethoven piano ballad or something like that.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a ballad. It's a little, I don't know if ballad's the right word, because it explodes. It's an explosion. And I and I've said this before, and I honestly, it's such an obvious thing to say. Or at the very least, it's such an unoriginal pick, but sometimes unoriginality is there because it's just correct. I would argue this is probably the greatest guitar solo ever. I know, Michael, you'd probably disagree with that, and that's okay. But yeah, no, it's just like how you said, just the bending and the tapping, and just, you know, taking these pentatonic scales and just expanding it to just crazy degrees. That's just stuff that he did. And honestly, I don't know if you'd find I know this was the first record, you know, this is kind of their announcement, but quite frankly, this is probably Eddie's magnum opus, especially if we're talking about his abilities as a guitarist. And Dave, you know, that's something I also kind of wanted to, you know, talk to you about a bit. You know, someone who's been listening to Van Halen for such a long time, like, kind of tell me some of the guitar techniques, because, you know, I'm not a guitarist. I'm just not. I'm terrible. In fact, when I listen to this stuff, I'm like, why bother? Really. So kind of walk me through that a bit. What are some of the techniques that he developed, or that he really perfected throughout his career, and then he really kind of helped pioneer with the guitar?
Sure. You know, the one influence that Edward would always cop to is Eric Clapton. He and his brother Alex were huge Cream fans. And just those long jams that trio would go off on, that was really, I know, inspiring to those guys early on, to the point where they were almost like a Cream kind of a jam band, like cover band in California. And it got them so far. I mean, they were certainly looked at as the best, you know, musicians in Pasadena, but it wasn't getting him a lot of gigs, and Dave sort of broke him of that habit. Probably the two biggest things early on that David Lee Roth contributed to that band was getting them to play shorter songs that, you know, people could actually like dance to and that sort of thing. And also changing the name of the band to Van Halen. Up until that point, they were called Mammoth. And they were going to change their name to Rat Salad, which is the name of a Black Sabbath song. And it was Dave that actually said, you know, hey, how about Van Halen instead? So Eric Clapton, certainly one of those influences on Edward. I think in Eruption, you can hear a little bit of Ritchie Blackmore. That's where a little bit of that classical guitar comes in as well. As I said, they were going to name the band at one point Rat Salad. So there's definitely a Tony Iommi influence there. You can probably hear that on that first record with Running with the Devil. I would maybe even Little Dreamer, things like that. But in terms of the techniques, I would say a couple of things that made him stand out right away. Obviously his picking technique, and I'm not a guitar player either, but his picking technique, very precise, very aggressive sounding as well. Interestingly enough, he did not hold his guitar pick with his pointer finger and his thumb. It was actually his middle finger and his thumb. And he held his pick really strangely, but that allowed him to get a little bit more speed when he was doing those really fast runs. I think that's one of those things that eventually you see a lot of heavy metal guitarists incorporate, particularly the thrash metal, speed metal guys later on, kind of that follow in the vein of like Alex Skolnick or Dave Mustaine or someone like that. Certainly he's very famous for the finger tapping, right? So the story goes, you know, this is a technique that other people had used. He references seeing, Edward references seeing Led Zeppelin back in, I think, 72 or 73, and watching Jimmy Page do that on stage. But Jimmy was playing one or two notes that way. Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, I think Jeff Beck at that point, also had used that technique a couple of times on record. But again, it's not really a style. A guy named Harvey Mandel, who played in a band called Canned Heat, was living in Pasadena giving guitar lessons. And Chris Holmes, who was the guitar player in Wasp, a very random reference, All these guys grew up together in LA, Pasadena area. Terry Kilgore is another guitar player that later on would go on to play with David Lee Roth's solo bands and stuff. This Mandel guy was given guitar lessons, and he is a person who showed, I think it was Terry and Chris, how to do that. Again, Terry claims that he showed Edward this, and Edward went, "That's interesting," and then sort of left it at that. Mm-hmm. But Edward really turned this into a significant part of his playing style, and it's got such a unique sound. It's so clean. As he would explain it, you sort of elongate, your hands when you're fretting, and then you're, hitting the different strings. It's like your hand's twice as long. So that's probably the biggest, most significant, playing style innovation that he did. And of course, he was the only one that was doing it. Alex and David apparently in the club days actually, kind of scolded Edward when he was soloing on stage. They wanted him to turn his back to the audience during solos, so that the other hotshot guitar players in the audience that were trying to figure out how he was getting that sound, they wouldn't be able to watch him play. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, a few years later, everybody on the Sunset Strip is finger tapping and things like that. So those are some of the big playing innovations in terms of him as a technician, as a person who's always chasing what he called the brown sound. It was that tone, that very thick, overdriven guitar sound. A lot of that was his Marshalls he played through. He's famous for never really, buying expensive guitars. He would buy pieces of junk, and he would take them apart and put them back together, and beat them up and put them back together. And a lot of famous guitarists, trying to think of over the past few days, people like Steve Lukather, Ted Nugent, Neil Schon from Journey will tell stories about how they would visit Edward on tour, or they go to his house and they pick up his rig. So his guitar set up his way, all of his amps set to his specifications and everything. They pick up his guitar thinking that they would play it and they'd sound like Eddie Van Halen. And they were so disappointed that it sounded like them. Mm-hmm. So, the other intangible with his playing style is it was just in his fingers, and there's no pedal that's going to do that for you. There's no guitar neck that's going to do that for you. It was just the guy who was just chasing these sounds in his head and figuring out how to make them happen.
I got a chance to watch an interview right before this of him talking about, that era of him ripping apart guitars and putting pickups and trying to create the Frankenstrat and stuff. And, the lack of pedals and the technology and stuff. Also, I think he mentioned came from, he couldn't even afford a pedal. So it all had to came from necessity, improvising. What did he have lying around that he could just put in to make sure he got ever more closer to the brown sound? If you could pick, Dave, just as an excuse to play some more music, a song that encapsulates all of Eddie's best techniques that he created, what do you think that song would be?
Wow, all the techniques. I don't know that there's one song that captures all the techniques, but I would maybe go to Out of Love Again. The Van Halens were not just classically trained, but their dad was a jazz musician. They played in little jazz bands with their dad at VFW halls and things like that. And I think the solo in Out of Love Again really showcases that jazz influence. Yeah, I love that solo.
That might be one of my favorites too.
It's just short. It's to the point. That's like Miles Davis soloing on a trumpet. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, you know, you mentioned the fact that, you know, Edward was poor. They migrated from the Netherlands. You know, the Van Halen story is like the story of America. It's an immigrant story. They come over on the boat. Their dad is looking for work as a jazz musician. He's not finding it there. They decide to go to America. He's going to go to California, entertainment, you know, capital of the world. Doesn't find any work there either. His dad becomes a janitor, this amazing musician, clarinet player, and you know, swing jazz band performer. And mom doesn't speak English, so she stays at home. As a matter of fact, the two boys, Alex and Edward, when they go to school, don't know any English, so they really struggle early on. So they really kind of turn all their energy and put it into their instruments: piano, clarinet. I mean, you know, some stories about him when he was a little kid is he could pick up almost any instrument and just make some music with it. And then eventually, famously, Christmas time, they get a set of drums and a guitar. So Edward's playing the drums, Alex is playing the guitar, and they both get really frustrated and they just switch, and history is made. So they don't have a lot of money to do anything with, but the money that they had went into music. The Frankenstrat that you're talking about is a generic $50 Fender Strat body, an $80 neck, and everything else was laying around Edward's house. He rewound the pickups himself. I mean, it's just amazing. And that, of course, is an iconic guitar now.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird how sometimes how things work out sometimes. I do kind of want to jump back, though, and kind of bring up Outta again, because it's a great song. Van Halen 2 is one of my favorite albums of theirs. But, you know, talking about Eddie, I mean, obviously he's great at soloing. That's undeniable, but he's also really good around riffs and just creating interesting sounding stuff. That song, I know you didn't hear it in the clip there, but it has like a really the riff has this really like aggressive groove to it, and it's got these cool like whammies to it. I mean, it's great. You know, so I think that is a good example of how he was able to really bring interesting dynamics in terms of the guitar to Van Halen. I do kind of want to move on to our personal picks here shortly, but Michael, just to kind of wrap things up with, as someone who really wasn't familiar with this band too much, you know, especially talking about Eddie's, you know, guitar playing, what, you know, I know you kind of play guitar as well, so I want to hear from you, what kind of stood out to you about his playing?
Yes, this is a great time to talk about the short snippets of acoustic music that we hear on some of these albums. Mm-hmm. I was talking about it with Dave earlier today, where I think there's no better way to actually get a read on a guitarist's talents than to hear them play acoustically. And it was songs like Spanish Fly and the intro to Little Guitars that actually kind of won me over on Eddie Van Halen. It was like, okay, I get it now. He's great. And he picked up an acoustic guitar and was somehow able to just make beautiful music with it. And Dave has a great story about how he picked up the acoustic at first, but we should hear Spanish Fly, because this is actually one of my favorite Van Halen tunes. First off, I'm not kidding. A fly actually landed on this book and I swatted it, so I think that's a sign. But
at least it didn't land on your head.
Oh boy.
But yeah, that song is just so cool. Like how it just kind of fits right in there in the album, and how it just stands up, and he kind of morphs Spanish style playing into his own Eddie Van Halen way, which I brought up to Dave earlier. I thought it was the coolest shit ever.
Yeah, I'm very happy you brought this one up, Mike, because I love Spanish Fly. You know, when I first learned Van Halen 2, I was like, when I first heard like the acoustic guitar, I was like, what is happening? And then he basically started shredding on an acoustic guitar, which I hadn't heard before. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. You know, and it's really, because you get to hear, because you mentioned earlier, you know, kind of talking about a mark of a good guitarist is how you can play acoustic. And I think it's really interesting when you kind of bring that up with, you know, Eddie. You know, you can hear, you know, his picking. You can hear very clearly, because the notes kind of, without all the distortion craziness going on with the electric, you can kind of hear more clearly his picking style, like his technique. And I think you can pick up a lot of those intricacies more. So yeah, really happy you brought that one up, Michael.
So the story is Ted Templeman, the legendary producer, certainly the classic Van Halen records, among many others like Doobie Brothers and Van Morrison. He would have a New Year's Eve party. And he always invited Edward and Alex over to that party. And I think shortly after they made the first record, they went over for New Year's Eve. There happened to be an acoustic guitar sitting around like Templeman's living room. And Ed picked it up and said, hey, you mind if I play? I said, no, go ahead. He goes, yeah, I never play acoustic guitar. I don't have one. So he sat there for a good part of the night. And like by the end of the night, he basically had kind of come up with something very similar to Spanish Fly. And Templeman was just like, you never play acoustic guitar? You just picked it up and you just came up with that brilliant thing? He's like, yeah, no big deal. So when it came time to record the second record, he said, hey, what do you think about doing, an acoustic solo? And thankfully we've got that recorded for all of time now.
Definitely. I guess we can segue now, right, Andrew, into the kind of personal favorites.
Yeah, just kind of mention some of our personal favorite records and songs, and kind of talk about how Eddie, in particular, made them great. Although all the other members of the band are pretty talented, so if you want to mention something like that, go ahead. I don't know who wants to go first there.
I think
you wanted to talk about a song that I also wanted to talk about off the first record, Andrew. That was one of your picks.
Okay, yeah. I could bring one of mine up first. Probably I would argue one of the most underrated, perhaps the most underrated for me at least, Van Halen song ever. I don't know if Michael has heard this one, but I'm talking about "I'm the One," which is off of, like Dave said, the debut record. Well, Eruption is the standout to me on that record, of course. As far as being the best, I'm the One comes very close behind, because you still get a lot of shredding, a lot of great rhythm guitar from Eddie on that one, and just these blistering riffs and these licks that just kind of intertwine with, Dave singing and Alex drumming on that one. It's such a great song, and it's a shame because it wasn't a single. You don't really hear that one play on the radio like all the other big hits from there, like "Running with the Devil" and "Talking About Love." It's just one that always stood out to me as being like just that, and the other song I want to play later is kind of encapsulates everything to me what makes Van Halen great. What did you want to say about that song, Dave?
The debut record, which is like a classic record, when all is said and done, through the course of Van Halen's, recording life, they sell, more than 70 million records worldwide. 3 diamond records, which is the first record, the debut, 1984 and 5150. So that means that those 3 albums sold 10 million plus each. And on this record, you got these classics like "You Really Got Me," "Running with the Devil," "Ain't Talking About Love," "Ice Cream Man." Everything on there is kind of a classic. And then you got this song, which might be the most bonkers song on the entire record. It has 2 solos from Edward Van Halen, and then a barbershop quartet style breakdown in the middle of it, which is just amazing. And these guys, one of the things that Henry Rollins talks about when he talks about Van Halen and seeing them for the first time opening for Ted Nugent back in 1977 or 78, is that they own the stage. You know, David Lee Roth is talking about, it's nice to be with you again. And Henry Rollins is like, you've never been here before. What are you talking about? And this is a song where this is their debut record, and they're talking about the record biz and taking care of the little kids and all this other kind of stuff. And it's just hilarious. But this is one of for me, this is one of my favorite moments on that record. And you're right. In a record that is chock full of classics that see radio play every day somewhere in the world, if not several times a day, this is one that probably deserves a little bit more attention.
Yeah. Fortunately, the clip that I have set off for this one does not include the Barber Quartet part, which is a brilliant part. I guess all you listeners at home, if for some reason you haven't heard the song, you should just go listen to the whole thing anyways. But Ben, do you mind playing us I'm the One right from the start?
To confirm, Andrew, I did listen to this song, and it is also one of my favorites on the debut, because this one and songs like Atomic Punk, I think, have the Eddie Van Halen nuances in there, the harmonics you heard in this one, and then like the scratching in some of the other songs. That is like my favorite Eddie Van Halen nuances.
Interesting. Right.
Yeah, it's a good time. I know that we're only playing snippets of these songs, but for all of our listeners of Soundcheck, you know that there's a great playlist, and just looking at this playlist, like, it just puts a smile on my face. There's just so many killer songs on here. So, Michael, talk about your pick from the first record then.
Yeah, I would definitely have to go with Atomic Punk. You gave me 3 songs off the first record, catered to my taste, and that one came out automatically, just first by the title, because it's like, oh, you have this question where it's like, are they going to take some punk influences, because it's the 70s, punk is popular, or at least at its most popular, but I'm glad to say there wasn't a lot of punk in it, and instead I got Van Halen at its full force. So Ben, you can play a little snippet of that if you want.
I am a victim of the science.
Yeah, I mean, you can just keep listening and keep listening to those songs.
Yeah.
You kind of don't want to stop it.
No. And it's see, you heard that scratching I'm talking about, and like how you can hear the Black Sabbath in it, and like what would eventually be thrash, and just like, I don't know, that kind of stuff makes me happy. Just on that first record, a lot of flavors, a lot of textures. Again, I'm mad at myself for not listening to this sooner.
Michael.
So Edward said,
Sorry. I do want to ask Michael something real quick. Sorry. Go ahead. I don't know who's going. Who's going?
This is the trouble with Zoom, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
So Edward said that the Atomic Punk started out, they said, let's write a parody of a punk song, right? So these guys, they play so sloppy and everything. And, I don't think a lot of people know, but, David Lee Roth was a huge punk rock fan. He was a big supporter of punk rock bands in Los Angeles after he had some success. He was part owner of a club called Club Zero, where the Go-Go's played, and Black Flag, and X played there, and Germs. So he kind of liked that. And, Edward, this really talented musician, he said, well, let's make a parody of the punk song. And, he commented later, in the end, it ended up sounding nothing like a punk song because they played too well. They were just such good players. They couldn't figure out how to get a punk song and sound sloppy like that. So what started out with kind of, silly intentions ends up being this classic killer of a song.
For sure. We got to move beyond the first record, though, because there's plenty of great hits that come in the David Lee Roth days. What's next for you, Dave, when it comes to your favorite picks?
So we talked a lot about guitar so far. When I really started to develop more fandom for them, as I mentioned, it was just prior to 1984 coming out. And when Jump was released as a single, everybody kind of had a freak out because you had the world's greatest guitar player spending too much time, many people thought, playing keyboards. And the fact of the matter is that Edward had been experimenting with keyboards for a long, long time. We mentioned Sunday Afternoon in the Park. But the first time that we hear Edward really take up synthesizer is a song called And the Cradle Will Rock. It's off of Women and Children First, which is the third record, and very famous for the spoken line from David Lee Roth, about juniors' grades. But the opening riff is as Edward on his very first synthesizer, I think he bought, run through this amazing wall of Marshall stacks, and it's just got this amazing sound. And for the longest time, nobody could figure out how he played this. So let's listen to a little bit of And the Cradle Will Rock.
Dave,
Have you seen juniors' grades?
This was the song I was listening to on my way to the office today on my bike. Would you say that out of any Van Halen song, is that the song that kind of defines your generation? Because like I was saying, I imagine like myself in an 80s movie listening to this song.
No, probably not my generation. That's probably a couple years before me. So whose generation? Jeff Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Probably his generation. Music to get stoned by. and go lay on the beach and surf. No, probably for my generation, if I had to pick one Van Halen song that kind of summarized like, what we loved about that band, I might pick Panama.
Oof. Nice. I'm also very happy you played this one, Dave, because I've always loved this song so much. It's interesting you say like it sounded like you got the sound from like the sound for the song from like stacking up a bunch of Marshalls, which is very apropos because the opening riff to me sounds like a building falling down. It's always just so great. I've always wondered, how they also got that sound on that track. Michael, do you have another pick that you want to play first, or do you want to go on to me?
Why don't you take this one?
Okay. So I want to play one more song since I know we you don't want to drag this episode on forever. Though I could just probably play the whole initial run of Van Halen with David Lee Roth. But a couple ones I'll mention real quick. We talked about acoustic stuff earlier. I love "Take Your Whiskey Home." I think that's a great song if you also like your instrumentals, acoustics, because it starts with acoustic and eventually builds to electric stuff. It's really good. Hang 'Em High off of Diver Down. I'm not the biggest Diver Down fan, but I do love that track. It's a really standout one. Again, just kind of showcases Eddie's frenetic guitar playing. Mean Street, the opening to Fair Warning, which is either that or Van Halen 2. One of those two are my favorite Van Halen records. And Mean Street just got a great opener. It's got this really sick groove. Lyrically, it's actually kind of interesting for Van Halen as well, as much as they could be under David. But if I had to pick one, my favorite Van Halen song actually comes off of 1984, which is kind of down there with Diver Down from being my least favorite of the David Lee Roth records. It's not saying they're bad, they're just not among my favorites. But one of the big singles from that record, and it's a little awkward one to say that's my favorite, but whatever, I'm going to say it anyways. Hot for Teacher. No, not for the lyrical content before anyone gets on me for that. Everything that I love about Van Halen is just condensed in this almost 5-minute track. It's so, beyond like David, just David's crazy antics. You talk about the instrumentals, Dave, you and I were talking about this one yesterday, if I remember correctly. And, you kind of said the song has like a big band swing feel. And that's basically what the song is, but somehow even faster, it feels like, and just a lot crazier and heavier and louder. And Dave, and you might want to say something about this. You mentioned kind of the dynamic between Alex Van Halen, his drumming, as well as Eddie's guitar playing, and how they're almost not battling per se, but they were trying to kind of dancing around each other. It's kind of push and pull between the two. And I think this track in particular is just a fine example of that. You kind of want to talk a little bit more about that, Dave?
Yeah, we talk about all the different influences that the Van Halen brothers picked up, and jazz is definitely one of those influences, and particularly their dad's style of music that he played as a professional was big band. So when you listen to that famous drum opening, right? So Edward comes up with Eruption, which is a standard for all guitar players, and Alex comes up with Hot for Teacher, which becomes the standard for all drummers, right? Everybody wants to figure out how he gets that double bass introduction. When you listen to that, you hear Gene Krupa, you hear Buddy Rich, these really aggressive swing drummers. And then you hear Edward come in, and it's very much a boogie, right? A lot of people listen to that riff that Ed starts that run that Ed starts the song with, and they can hear some ZZ Top in there, some boogie. But I really challenge you to think about it a different way. Listen to what Edward's doing on guitar, and imagine that it's not guitar. Imagine that it's a horn section. The way that he comes in there. Bum, 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 bum. Imagine that's saxophone, that's brass, right? That really is like a big band swing song. And you've got David over top of it. He's having fun. I mean, in the studio, he basically sat there. They sat there in a group and they just made things up until it sort of kind of fit the song. But I think that's an amazing bit of musicianship there. It was kind of in vogue a few years ago for artists like the Bird and the Bee and other folks to like reinvent Van Halen songs or hard rock songs in a different style. Big band was one of those styles. I would have loved to have heard someone's version of that. That would have been really cool. So I would love to hear a little Hot for Teacher.
Yeah, I would also like to hear that version as well. But alas, I think the original will suffice just as much. Ben, do you mind starting this one at about the 2-minute, 10-second mark? I think that's, we'll kind of hear a verse and a solo as well, and kind of help understand, for anyone who may have not heard the song, why the song is so great.
Give me something to ride on, man.
One of the things about last few days where you've seen all these tributes, news reports and stuff about Edward's passing, everybody cuts to that video where you see a smiling Edward playing that solo and like walking down the table in the library, and that's just a legendary music video, and it's one of the things that everybody always mentions is not just his style, but the dude always played with a smile on his face, that impish grin, as Valerie Bertinelli's wife called it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't know if you've point blank set this up yet, but just listen to that song, man. I always, it brings me, again, barring the lyrical content, it brings me so much joy hearing how just the dynamics between all these instruments and just kind of just everything that this band brings, between David Lee Roth's just undeniable charisma and the drumming from Alex and the guitar playing from Eddie, this band it's just the encapsulation of fun. This band was always just so much fun during this era, like just during those first 6 records. I'd be hard pressed to find any band as fun as Van Halen was. So, and I think that song's a perfect encapsulation of that. Michael, do you have anything you want to add about the song before we move on to, I think it's one of your picks?
Yeah. One more question to Dave about this record, because from what I understand, 1984 is very much Eddie's record. He had this is like the first instance where he has like kind of full creative control along with the producer, right? That affected the album.
So it did. This is the first record that was recorded at 5150, which is his famous recording studio at his house. He lied to the city fathers in Pasadena and told them he was building a racquetball court because he wasn't allowed to build a studio. So it is the world's greatest sounding racquetball court, where all of the later records were recorded as well. But this becomes Eddie's Home Away from Home. And actually that causes a lot of discord within the band itself. Essentially, halfway through the record, they sort of locked out, he and the engineer, Don Landy, really locked out the producer, Ted Templeman, and David Lee Roth and the rest of the band. And Ed just worked 24/7. Ted Templeman famously had to go in and basically say, stop writing songs. We've got a deadline and you've got a record done and we need to finish it. Let's get it pressed and let's get it in stores. But every song on there was what Ed was feeling at that moment. That includes Jump. It includes 1984, the instrumental that leads into Jump. One of the songs I sent you, that's kind of another one of those on the radio sometimes, but you don't always hear it a lot. I'll Wait, which is it's a more interesting keyboard statement to me than even Jump is at that point. But yeah, that's when Ed really takes control of the sound of Van Halen and the songwriting, and kind of deciding that he's going to be the only one that sort of charts the future for the band musically. Mm-hmm. And that includes no more cover songs.
For sure. Yeah. And just keeping the train moving, my last pick goes back to Fair Warning, which I can probably say with at least 70% certainty is my favorite Van Halen album, because I heard someone say this is the guitar player's favorite Van Halen album. This is where it really kind of comes together, and Eddie just puts the name out there. And the song I have queued up is Hear About It Later. And it just kind of captures all those reasons that I just mentioned, where, it just has everything you want. And this is another one that I was listening to like last night as I was falling asleep. And then the same one that kept me up for another 3 hours, just because it gave me some adrenaline. So here you go. Hear About It Later.
Can we pick it up at that cue, Ben? That's a great song. It's that solo there is really kind of slinky sounding. It's really off the wall from anything else like that on the record. That's one of my favorites too.
For sure.
Andrew, Michael.
Yeah, go ahead.
Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, I think we are starting to wrap up our kind of pick section, right?
I agree. I think Dave might have one more he wants to play, but before that, I do want to ask you a thing real quick. And I know this is mainly about Eddie, but again, since you really hadn't listened to Van Halen before, I am just to get like a quick thought from you about what you think of David Lee Roth as a frontman.
Tough question, considering David Lee Roth is the exact opposite of the usual singer-songwriters, frontmen that I listen to. For now, I think Dave would agree. Better than Sammy Hagar. And I think I'm winning the majority of Van Halen fans when I say that, right?
Pretty much. I mean, that was always like a big topic of debate.
Is there anyone that prefers Sammy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's sort of, again, Van Halen won. the first 6 albums, I mean, just untouchable, really. There's some people that don't like Diver Down and some other little moments here and there, but largely that's their creative period. And Dave adds a lot to that band, all the vocal melodies, all the lyrics, a lot of the song arrangements, he would have collaborated with Edward on, and it was really those 2 guys driving the band.
Yeah.
It wasn't Alex and Mike. Sammy Hagar came as an established artist. Again, 1970s guy. I mean, a good voice. I don't particularly like his voice. I mean, he's probably got a better range. He might have a stronger voice. I know live, he probably had a stronger performance vocally. But they lost a lot of character and a lot of their style when they split ways with Dave. And, to me, Sammy's kind of very generic front man. I think one of the things that bothers me, moving forward now that Edward's passed away, there's a lot of really great music that Edward wrote with Sammy in the band. And unfortunately, I have to suffer through that music with Sammy's bad lyrics over top. When you look at songs like, Andrew mentioned Pound Cake, which is just sort of despicably stupid. The song Black and Blue, Van Halen during their creative period with Dave, men and women love that band equally. And they packed themselves into those shows. A different kind of fan really took to the Van Hagar stuff. I was not one of those folks. I think they were probably at their best when Sammy stayed off of the double entendres and wrote songs like Right Now or Dreams, something that's a little bit more poetic. You can kind of be poetic and then incredibly crass, like with like song through song on some of those records. And then the last period, Gary Sharon and kind of forward, they really did not release very much music. Edward really famously stayed at 5150 and just played all day with his brother. So hopefully, right, Wolfgang, his son, and Alex will go through there and they'll find some of those chestnuts for us. And maybe we'll get to hear some of those lost classics. Like, they recorded several songs with Dave back around 2002, 2001 that were never released. I know that there's probably some stuff with Sammy that they didn't release. So we'll see what comes out of the Van Halen vault moving forward. But yeah, I'd pass. I will personally pass on the Van Hagar records for the moment.
Awesome. Any final any songs you want to play before we kind of move into the next segment of the show?
Yeah, so we'll go in a little bit different direction then. The other song I had queued up, which I'm not going to play, but I'm going to mention, is a song off of 1984 called "Girl Gone Bad." A really great interaction between Alex and Edward. Again, that pounding rhythm section of Van Halen is really Edward and his rhythm guitar playing, and then Alex's drums. But I'm going to go to Diver Down, and I'm going to switch up the tempo a little bit. And a song that is near and dear to my heart. It just sort of screams the sun going down in July. It's a song called Secrets. If you pick it up, Ben, where we had it queued up right before the solo.
Sometimes you got to run. You're running blind, but you jump the gun. The question is not does love exist, but when she leaves, where she goes. I got the feeling she don't know either. Wait like the wind, watch where she blows.
of great texture there with the bass and the rhythm section. You're totally right, where it's definitely a conversation.
One of my favorite parts about that song, besides that really just wonderful solo by Edward, is the lyrics for that. We're talking about the difference between Sammy and Dave. David Lee Roth on tour would buy postcards and bumper stickers from like truck stops and stuff. And basically he threw all of them kind of in a, pile or something and picked them out one at a time. And that's how he came up with the lyrics to that song.
Wow.
That's classic Van Halen.
All right. Excellent. All right. So kind of do the last part of this episode, kind of to wind things down here. We've talked a lot about, the music, a lot about technique, but Dave, I think that Michael, I want to give you the floor here and talk about any Van Halen stories you have, especially with involves Eddie. I mean, you've already given a bunch of, stories throughout the episode. Do you have any more like that? Please share. If you have any personal stories, seeing them live or whatever, please share.
You've given us stories throughout our tenure at CM Life, so I'd love to hear another one.
Yeah, if you like music and you work at CM Life, you there's not a chance that you're going to walk out of there without hearing about Van Halen. But actually, this T-shirt is the last. I wore this the last time I saw Van Halen. The last time I will see Van Halen was in 2015 at DTE. And you're right, I did take my son. That was the only time that he will have seen Van Halen as well. And I think they sort of knew that was going to be, if not the last tour, one of the last tours. And one of the things we learned through the news coverage of Edward's death is about 2 years ago, they were very close to launching a stadium tour with the original band, and that would include Michael Anthony. They had their manager, Irving Azoff, had a big plan, I guess. He was going to take out special guests on different legs of the tour. So you might have gone to Comerica Park and seen, the original lineup of Van Halen headlining and the Foo Fighters opening up, or, Metallica on some of those dates. So that would have been an epic show. But I was blessed to see him 3-4 times. One of the times really, really quickly, just where journalism and fandom come together, was in 92 or 93, where they were playing a sold out show at the Palace of Auburn Hills. And I got a photo pass, and the show was sold out. The movie Wayne's World had just come out. So the song they played before they took the stage was Bohemian Rhapsody. And if you're familiar with the movie Wayne's World, there's the famous scene when they're in the car and the fast part comes on to Bohemian Rhapsody and they all start headbanging. It was an amazing experience to be at the front of the stage and turn around, and the whole place is like singing this song. And when it comes to that part of the song, every person at the Palace of Auburn Hills started headbanging at the same time there. That was just a cool moment. And then kind of right after that, the lights went out. And this was the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge tour. So they opened with the song Pound Cake. And again, I'm taking photos there. So I'm in the photo pit. I'm not a tall person. So the stage is just a little bit taller than I am. So I'm on my tippy toes, and it is pitch black. And there's no lights anywhere. You could just see the lights on the amps. That was it, just sort of little pinpoints of light. So you hear that famous drill opening, right? And, I know the song. I'm very familiar with Van Halen, so I know what side of the stage to be on when the show opens up. So you hear the drill intro, and you hear the drums kind of kick in, and then the song really kicks in. All the lights come on. And I'm standing right in front of Edward. And the first thing I notice is, this is what the bottom of Edward Van Halen's shoes look like, because they're hanging right over the edge of the stage, right in front of my face. And he looks down, he gives me that sort of Eddie look, that kind of thing, right? And it takes me about 30 seconds to realize, I've got a camera. I could take pictures of this. So somewhere I've got I think 2 rolls of film, badly shot film. I'm not a photographer. And back in that day, I really was not very good with those cameras. But that was an amazing experience to be that close to your idol and being able to see him play live. And, you know, it doesn't matter at that point who's fronting the band. When Eddie Van Halen's playing guitar, just a couple, 50 feet ahead of you, it's a pretty special experience. So it's sad to me that I won't get to see him again. I won't have that experience because there was something about him playing live that was just otherworldly. So that's gone, but I'll move into my recommendations real quick. We are certainly blessed with a lot of music left behind. And one of the great things, if you want to spend a whole afternoon deep diving Van Halen stuff, is to go on YouTube and take a listen to some of the demos. The famous Gene Simmons demo. That's available. There's so many unreleased songs. There's probably 20 really good unreleased songs, and also snippets of music that later turned into songs. So there's a lot of stuff to go find on YouTube. But if you want to find out more about the band and how it came together and sort of how they got to be Van Halen, I got two recommendations for you. The first one is this great book called Van Halen Rising. So this came out a couple of years ago. It is called Van Halen Rising: How a Southern California Backyard Party Band Saved Heavy Metal. It is by a guy named Greg Renoff. Beautifully written book. There's a ton of unreleased photos in here of these guys playing backyard parties in California, playing high schools and football fields and things like that. It's an amazing story. Again, an immigrant story. People who came to America to find a better way of life. Interestingly enough, too, as Dave would say many times, it's funny how this band that's so associated with the California sound, the next evolution of the Beach Boys with a little bit better guitar player. None of them are from California. As he would say, you sort of take the map of the United States and you flip it on its side and everybody just rolls into California. Dave's from Indiana. Mike Anthony's from Wisconsin, I think. And then, of course, the Van Halens are from Netherlands. So Van Halen Rising details their early lives, the forming of the band, the first bass player, Mark Stone, who also just passed away a few weeks ago, all the way up into the recording of the first Van Halen record. And the book ends with them embarking on their first world tour, where they would just mercilessly upstage an aging and tired Black Sabbath featuring Ozzy in 1978 and just really put that band out of its misery. So that's the first one. The second one I would recommend is called Running with the Devil. This is written by their manager, Noel Monk. Noel Monk had the most interesting job in the world. He was a roadie. He was a touring manager for several acts. Worked with people like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. Prior to managing Van Halen on their first world tour, the gig he had before that was managing the Sex Pistols during their one and only tour of America. So he went from the Sex Pistols to Van Halen in 1978, which, wow, what the stories of this guy have are just amazing. So this takes us through that first tour. So it kind of picks up where Greg's book leaves off, and it takes us right to the end of the original version of the band, where David leaves in 1985, and details kind of the ups and downs of life in a rock band like that. So both of those books really well written, amazing stories, and will help put Van Halen in a whole new light.
I mean, you brought it into the recommendation section by yourself, Dave. Do we want to just continue with that, Andrew, or do you have some final thoughts on Van Halen you want to add?
I think Dave, I will say this, one of my biggest, I don't know if regret is the right word, but the biggest disappointments in my life we'll have to live with now. So I'll never be able to see Eddie Van Halen live. And obviously it's a bit of a selfish thing to say after someone passes away. Obviously that's not the most tragic thing. Of course not. But yeah, I mean, as someone like me who loves Eddie's, music as much as I do, yeah, it sucks I'll never be able to see that. Dave mentioning that. No, Rollins has said that there's nothing like seeing Eddie Van Halen live. So it's a shame I'll never be able to see that myself. So, but anyways, yeah, I don't want to end on too much of a downer note. Although my recommendation is not exactly the happiest sounding thing either. So I'm going to go with something completely different.
Oh, Andrew, before you go completely different, I'm back because my recommendation, I took a backseat for this because 4 people, it's kind of a too many cooks thing, especially with 2 guys who love to talk. But, geez, you can really hear that I haven't been talking this whole episode. I brought in a recommendation that is Eddie Van Halen related. I love Eddie Van Halen. I love metal music. This is shit I grew up on, thanks to my dad. But 1982, a 12-year-old Dweezil Zappa, son of Frank Zappa, releases the single "My Mother's a Space Cadet," backed with Crunchy Water. I have the vinyl copy here. I'm playing it from YouTube because it's not streaming, so I'm kind of pulling a double Andrew. But produced by Eddie Van Halen and Don Landy, who was a engineer for a lot of the stuff that the usual Van Halen suspects did. Eddie Van Halen plays on the intro, allegedly, and you really hear that influence. It's a big Dweezil ripoff, basically. But I like this song a lot. So. Bet y'all didn't think you'd be hearing the Zappa name on the Eddie Van Halen episode, but there you go.
They were pretty tight too. As a matter of fact, Eddie, they played a talent show, I think at Dweezil's middle school, and Eddie roadied for him. And Dweezil played one of his Frankenstrats. At least one of the striped guitars. I don't know if it was this Frankenstrat or not, but it was one of Ed's guitars. That was pretty cool for a middle schooler to say, yeah, Eddie, could you put my amp over there, please? Could you tune that up for me? Detune, please. Yeah.
Well, I'm very happy, Ben, you interrupted me, although it did terrify me slightly because I thought something had gone wrong. But no, I'm glad I got to hear that story. I'll move on to my recommendation, though. Like I said at the start of the season, expect to hear quite a bit of post-punk for me in this section of the show moving forward, and I have another example. I have been listening to this artist almost exclusively, apart from Van Halen, this past week. It turned into a small obsession now. I don't really know why. The band's called Echoberyl. It's Echo, and then it's all one word, Echo. The Burial is spelled Beryl. It's a duo from France. They kind of are on the more electronic side of post-punk, which is not my favorite side of it, but their first record's a little more guitar-driven, and it's got a lot of really spacey atmospheres. It's like just what I really like about post-punk. So, yeah, and this band is just, again, like I said, it's just been an obsession that I've had for the past week. A lot of great hooks. That first record's basically an earworm, but not a bad one because the music is actually pretty good. What I would like, Ben, if you could play the song that I've been listening to the most from them, which is called Prisoner. It's off their first record. If you could play that starting at, I believe, the 20-second mark.
Dig that. That's post-punk I could get into, no doubt.
Yeah, I really like that. That chorus has just been on loop in my head, and maybe now it's for everyone too. So, yeah, probably didn't expect to hear some post-punk on the Eddie Van Halen episode, but there we go. Michael, finish us off here.
Yeah, I want to offer some final words on Eddie and my experience going through this, because I had probably the most unique situation researching for this episode, in that I not only didn't know anything about Van Halen, but I could almost say I had some disdain for Van Halen, and that got flipped on its head, and I never thought that could happen. And of course that comes back to Dave making a really awesome curated playlist for me. It comes back to actually going and doing some research, going out of my way, looking at some interviews, looking at some documentaries and stuff. And, you know, I realized this band isn't everything you think it is. It really goes a lot deeper. And I think, you know, Eddie once said in an interview that I watched earlier today, he was always more focused on being a musician, not a rock star. And I think Dave can speak on that as well. And I think I learned that in the last week or so. So I will be listening to more Van Halen in the future, and I think you should too. I definitely learned something from this episode. So thanks for coming on, Dave. It was really fun. My last recommendation is just for those listeners who maybe don't, like the three listeners, AKA our moms, who listen to just hear our voices and maybe don't like the music, but will listen to us talk. So here's a John Lennon thing. It's just, it's from the newest release, the Give Me Some Truth compilation that came out on John's 80th birthday on October 9th last week. And, you know, I looked at this and I thought, okay, great. Another capitalist scheme to cash in on the Beatles. But I was actually surprised. A lot of these songs are perfectly mixed and some of the best I've ever heard. And this version of Oh Yoko is probably my favorite version I've ever heard of it. And one of my favorite John songs, period. I know the lyrics don't really hold up. They're kind of creepy, like kind of most of Van Halen's lyrics, but here you go. Yoko, the best way. I think it should be heard.
In the middle of the night, in the middle of the night, I call your name. Oh, Yoko. Oh, Yoko. My love will turn you on.
Sorry, Dave. I had to get my last jab in, but
Those are not creepy lyrics. You're thinking of Poison or Sammy Hagar.
Well, Michael, I want to say one more thing off of that. I'm glad you kept it open mind. Very happy you actually, because you're the one who recommended this. I'm very happy that you did this. Happy that you've listened to, you like Van Halen now. I never thought I'd hear you say that. But Michael, welcome to the dark side of dad rock. Anyways, I think that's it for this episode. This weekend though, and I'm very much looking forward to the next episode. And I share the same sentiments between Michael and Ben here. I say that we're gonna be going through each of our record collections. We're gonna do a little more video stuff here, and we're gonna randomly pick out records from each other's record collections and kind of see who comes up. You might hear something really cool. You might hear something unexpected. You might find something really embarrassing. Will we find the hitting Britney Spears record in Michael's collection? Stay tuned to find out. And of course, as we always do to end this episode, what do we say?
Good night,
Detroit.
Dedicate one to the ladies.